Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our third session of the Supporting Diverse Workforces series. My name is Sarah Walker and I'm the Sector Development Lead here at QCOS. And I've got my colleagues Nina and Sam online today helping me deliver this webinar. So before we get into things today, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on today, the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present. QCOS also thanks First Nations peoples for the gift of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and we're committed to walking alongside First Nations peoples and working towards representation, Makarrata and treaty. I would also like to further extend my respect to any First Nations peoples online with us today, and I'd like to encourage you all to utilise the chat function to let us know which traditional lands you're dialing in from today as well. So thank you again for joining us today. This session is on finding the candidates you're looking for. And for those who aren't aware, Supporting Diverse Workforces is a 5-part webinar series aimed at supporting community organisations to develop their human resources capability. And the series is covering many aspects of attracting, supporting and retaining a diverse workforce. So we'd like to thank the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training who funded this program of work through their Growing Workforce Participation Fund. So just a bit of housekeeping before we jump in. You will receive a post-event email after the session today, which includes the slides from the presentation, as well as access to an online resources library. And today the format of the session will be one part will be consultants we are working with, Lisa and Christine, who will be presenting information on recruitment and selection. And then in the second half of the session today, we'll be joined by 4 panellists who will be sharing their own experiences in relation to inclusive recruitment practices. So I'd like to welcome Christine from Utano Global and Lisa from Camden HR Consulting to deliver the first part of this presentation. Just to give you a bit of background, Christine is the principal consultant of Utano Global, a diversity, equity and inclusion consulting firm, and is the director for Queensland at Migrant Women in Business, a national social enterprise supporting entrepreneurial migrant and refugee women. And Christine champions human transformation by fostering inclusive cultures within organisations. Lisa is the principal consultant of Camden HR Consulting and is the lead facilitator of a boutique DEI training and consulting company. With more than 25 years of experience, Lisa is driven by the importance of DEI to enable both leaders and team members to provide the best service to their clients. So if you've got any questions today in relation to Lisa and Christine's presentation, please pop your questions in the chat and they will respond to these questions following their presentation. So now I'll hand over to Lisa and Christine. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Lisa Stockwell, and I'm just going to take you through the first part of this presentation. Where is everybody? So last time when we got together, we were looking at how to actually write our job ads and put those things together. And today we're going to look at how to actually make the most of trying to find them. How do we actually get them to apply in the first place? All right, next slides, Christine, please. If we could just zip down to our agenda, that would be terrific. Okay, so when we talk about recruitment, we typically are talking about the recruitment process and the selection process. But really, it's actually broken into these 2 areas, recruitment and then selection. So we're going to have a look firstly at where should you be looking for candidates, how to actually get them to apply. And an important part of that is why should they work for you? Why should they actually make the effort to put pen to paper, so to speak? So it really needs to be an inclusive, holistic approach that you're taking and not just focusing on this one particular part of the employee life cycle. Okay, so let's dive into recruitment to start with. Now, as I said, last time we got together, we had a look at how to actually write the job ad. But where you're putting that ad is equally important. Not surprisingly, if you're just relying on employee referrals for your new hires, you're going to keep getting the same type of candidate as what is already in your organisation. So we've got to go beyond that and start to look in other places to get a broader range of candidates. Isn't that the definition of insanity? You keep doing the same thing but expecting a different outcome. So we need to start doing something different. Okay, and there's lots of different places that you can be looking. Excuse me. Um, we're very familiar with using job boards. Yep, we'll put an ad on Seek or Smart Jobs, Indeed, or it might be a professional job, we'll go to LinkedIn. Um, you're going to find with any of these things, there's a couple of limitations. Firstly, for something like Seek or Indeed, it's really you're targeting candidates that are already looking. Um, you're not finding those passive candidates who might be highly qualified, but they're not actually actively looking for a role at the moment. Um, you might pick some of those people up on LinkedIn, maybe, or Smart Jobs. If they have registered, they might get those sort of prompts coming from you, but largely you're still going to have a very untapped talent base out there. Um, the other thing with something like LinkedIn, not surprisingly, the people that you're connected with are going to be quite similar to yourself. So again, you're not going to be getting that diversity of candidate pool coming through. Employee referrals I've already spoken about. It's going to be the same as your current employee base. Recruiters, unless you're specifically telling recruiters that you're looking for a broad range of candidates, that you value lived experience, um, you know, push back. Yep, I want at least a 50-50 balance of male, female, or whatever those criteria are. Actually ask them, have they done disability confident recruiting? Have they done additional training in this sort of space, for example? Really push back, because otherwise they're just going to follow the same tired path, the one that is the fastest, the easiest, so they get the fastest return on their time investment. Where the magic happens is when you put in a little bit more work. And so that's going to be things like using Seek Out Recruit or targeting grassroots organisations or specialist media, or partnering with support agencies or not-for-profit organisations. Have a look at whether you can actually go and use student placements, create entry-level roles again if you don't have them at the moment, or apprenticeships that might allow you to bring in a wider range of candidates. I know of one organisation, for example, that was really struggling with hiring staff, particularly in remote areas. And one of the things that they did was on their reference check forms using XREF or a product like that, the very last question at the bottom was something like, are you looking for a role yourself? We are hiring. And they actually have picked up a number of people into their organization who were referees. Okay. Now, it's no surprise, the more hoops that you need a candidate to jump through, the fewer candidates you are going to get. So you really need to think about what is that balance between you getting enough information and being able to shortlist candidates versus how much you actually are getting them to do for a particular job. It really needs to be in proportion to that role that you're looking for. So I think we've talked in the past about there is no point in requiring someone who might be applying for a 6-month, cleaning contract, to be answering, extensive pages of selection criteria and doing a cover letter for a job of that level. Whereas that might be something that might be more appropriate for a very senior management role. Think about, are there multiple ways for your candidates to apply? There are a number of candidates out there who might not actually have access to a computer or a laptop. Everything they do, they need to do using their phone. Is your application process one where they can do it all properly and efficiently from their phone? What if they don't have that level of technology? Um, can they apply in other ways? Can they actually drop off a paper application if they want to? Can they actually talk to someone? If they're looking for further information about the role, if they would like to request reasonable accommodations, can they actually talk to a real person? Do you make it easy for them to find someone to talk to about this role, or is it hidden? That they've end up having to go through reception, and reception's got to try and work out who on earth might be possibly responsible for this recruitment. Um, that bottom point, can candidates identify themselves in your ad or on your website? So when they're reading the language in your ad, when they're looking at the pictures on your website, are they reflective of the candidate, or do they look like a different type of group of people? So make sure that you really give some thought to who is reflected. And it's not just having a token, coloured person or a token woman. Do you have a range of ages and abilities on display? It's not just beautiful people. Okay, next slide. Now, even if it is relatively easy for a candidate to apply, so they've read the ad, they've gone, yep, I can do that job, yep, that looks all right. What is going to prompt them to actually apply to your organisation? As we looked last time, there are hundreds of job ads every week being posted uh, in the community services sector. So, what is going to make someone decide that your organisation and this particular role is one that is worth their time and effort in putting that application in for? Because it's a stressful process. It takes a lot of time and effort to actually craft a cover letter and make sure that your CV is up to date. And then, should you get an interview, you've got a bit of nervousness about that and actually doing the whole process. Why should they go through all of this for your company? So you really need to have a look at what is your employee value proposition. Um, it's more than just the money that you can offer. It's a whole range of things that we'll have a quick look at. So it really is these four key areas. So the material offerings. So that's going to be the financial stuff, but also, you know, do they have a good, work setup? Are you getting a laptop and double screens and a phone? And what's the company like in terms of that physical material offering for you? Do you have opportunities to grow and develop, or are they going to be in this same role year in, year out? And for some people, they love being in the same role, but they're still looking for, opportunities to keep their skills up to date, or specializing in particular little areas. Um, Connection and community, and meaning and purpose. A lot of organizations, particularly in the community services sector, have got a really strong purpose that people identify with. Are you making that known to candidates on your website and in the ad? Is that something that's really clear? And that connection and community. So people, we love connection with others. How are you making sure that that's something that is apparent through your job ad and your website? So really look at how you can craft these four interconnected elements to make your employee value proposition as compelling as it possibly can be. Is there flexible work? Is there an early finish? Can people's salary sacrifice? Are they getting, opportunities for mentoring from, maybe really interesting types of work, or from really people who are specialists in this area? Does your company have a really good reputation in a particular field? These are all the sort of things that you need to be promoting. All right, selection. Um, you are not going to find, well, very rarely will you find candidates who meet 100% of your criteria. And that's a good thing. It gives you an opportunity for them to grow and to be able to develop. And that's something that's going to hold someone to your organization, that opportunity to grow. We love learning new stuff. So look at how you can make that happen.
So We talked earlier about the selection process, and you'll remember last time we took you through some of the challenges around using traditional pathways in order for you to get new candidates. Now, the pathway that I guess is used in the selection process, the traditional pathway, is that of merit selection. I personally come from a public sector background and have been through the merit selection process on numerous occasions. So for me, it's really important to look at what is it that you're really looking for with a merit selection process? How are you actually ascertaining the skills that a person actually needs to bring in order for them to be able to deliver on the job? So basically, you know, with merit, you need to really look and revisit your merit selection processes, because too often they're almost in a set and forget basket, where a set of criteria has been developed, which, without an objective look or getting different points of view, could in and of itself be laced with biases, and could undoubtedly be excluding people who have traditionally been excluded from those positions. So how can you mitigate against some of those biases that might be inherent in your merit selection process? Really look at your criteria and your definition for that job. Really look at the skill sets that you are wanting for that job. Earlier on, I was chatting to an engineer who had worked overseas, and she basically, one of the criteria for a job was Australian experience. And being obviously a new migrant, this person did not have that. And she actually then pushed back on the recruiter and said, look, you haven't actually taken time to ask me about the skills that I have, the places that I've worked, and the experiences that I have. You know, based on this, your number one selection criteria is Australian experience. How is that relevant when, you know, there's international standards for the area that I work in? And given that pushback, she was able to get the interview. But not many people are confident enough to be able to push back against recruiters who are asking for the same set of criteria that they've asked for before. Do you rely on other assessment methods besides merit? Do you look at, for example, psychometric testing or other things that can influence your decision-making rather than the historical merit selection processes? What opportunities are there that can enhance a candidate's merit, such as education, internships, professional development, and other things that may not be equally available across the board? Cultural fit. We hear this conversation a lot, cultural fit. With culture, you're recruiting for the culture that you have then. But if you're wanting something different, you're looking at bringing in something that may disrupt that culture. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing. Disruption shouldn't always be seen in the negative. It should be what can difference contribute. And in many instances, cultural fit is put on the same, I guess, criteria as that merit selection process. That we're able to integrate into this environment, which, if you think about it, when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're wanting that different point of view. You're wanting that perspective that maybe your organization has had some blind spots associated with it traditionally in the past. How will you get that if you do not disrupt the status quo? Lisa talked earlier about your networks and referrals. If you are relying on a purely and almost homogenous networks, that means the same old, the people you've used in the past, it is highly unlikely that you are going to get anything different. My keyboard keeps sticking. So with your actual CV selection and looking at your actual, and looking at your selection criteria to assess CVs rather than getting a general feel. So one of the things that we try to encourage organizations to look at is actually focus more on the skills that you need for the job. Traditionally, people, whether they admit it or not, said to scan a CV and get a general feel based on what the person says. Do they think this person will fit in? Have they worked in this organization? Have they got that sort of experience? But having worked in a particular organization, having, a certain level of experience, does that prepare them for the skill set that you may need now, or more importantly, that you may need in future, or even more importantly, the skill gap that you may have within your organization? If you don't actually have a clear understanding of that when you're scanning CVs, you may tend to just look them over and get a general look and feel, and again, be using your unconscious bias to be guiding you rather than actually taking an objective look at what is required for that job. Use a marking guide to identify each criteria identified in the CV. Try as much as possible to actually mitigate against the biases that you traditionally may have that you may not actually be aware of. De-identify your CVs if possible. This is a very simple technique, and yet I'm surprised at how little organizations use this. There are very few organizations that de-identify CVs, and yet we know inherently there's a lot of biases associated with even just people looking at people's names or the geographical location that they may be located in. And that simple de-identification can actually increase the pool of candidates that are being examined by your organization. Remember, you're not looking for a unicorn, and we've talked about this in the previous sessions that we've talked about before. You're not looking for a candidate who is 100% match, who is who's all of these things. You're looking for somebody with a particular set of skills to give you a particular set of deliverables, or to bring a different set of perspectives to your organizations. And the clearer that you are on this, the clearer you will get to getting to a more objective set of criteria that you can use to assess your CVs. So within the selection interview process, interviews are very stressful. So really try to encourage candidates to relax. Offer different interviewing techniques. We're now in this age where digital technology is now ubiquitous with how we do business. So offer more online interviews that allows a candidate to prepare and maybe have a bit of a cheat sheet on the side that will help them to relax during that interview process. Offer flexible time. COVID has really made us conscious of the fact that when you are at work, you're also doing life. Not that we didn't know that before, but we always used life as almost this thing that could push aside, and work was the thing that came first. You had to be diligent in the office between set number of hours, and that was the most efficient and most productive way for us to do work. Well, COVID blew all of that out of the water when we showed and demonstrated that, guess what? If you have a global pandemic, we can adjust and we can be more efficient. So now we live in a world where we've got a whole lot of tools that we can now use, digital tools, which we had before. We had all of these tools before COVID. We just now know and appreciate that they do not impact on productivity and efficiency as that myth that we were perpetuating before COVID might have led us to believe. Use interview panels that are diverse. Bring people that are external to your organization, people who have diametrically opposing views to yourself. Remember, you are looking for something that's different from what your organization has. And if you're really serious, you've got to get people to assess things that have a different lens. Because if you're looking at the same thing through your own lens, chances are you will not see the areas that you are blind to. Take some bias awareness training. Educate yourself around your own bias. First of all, admit and know that you have bias, and when you're approaching it, asking the question, how do I mitigate my bias in these circumstances, rather than saying, oh no bias exists around here. We offer everybody the same equal opportunity, which is the myth that a lot of organizations perpetuate, which is why it's very difficult to get people of diverse backgrounds to get a foot in the door, because that myth perpetuates that everybody is blind to their bias and isn't doing enough to mitigate against that. Use the interview marking guide for each question. I talked earlier about skills and really focusing in on those skills. Allow the interviewers to make their decisions independent of each other. You've heard of the mob mentality where somebody might have an opposing view, but be taken in by what others think. Allow people who are on your panel to actually give their independent view first, and then look at the decisions independently and then collectively together, rather than making the collective decision drive the decision making. Use clear languages, no euphemisms, particularly in the public sector and NGO space. There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of acronyms. Make sure that you're using terms and plain English as much as possible. A word about direct contact and handshakes with candidates. Direct eye contact does not necessarily mean engagement. There's some communities and some sectors where respect is given to people by looking down and looking away. Don't immediately make assumptions about the fact that somebody isn't making direct eye contact at you, as in that they're not interested, they don't know. But again, if you've done some bias awareness training, you'll be able to know and understand how to mitigate against that and not unnecessarily penalize candidates who have a different perspective or look at respect in a different way. How do you diversify your interview panel? You can, in the community services sector, you have a large pool of volunteers. And so those volunteers make up a significant component of the workforce. And a lot of those volunteers have a huge workspace, huge experiences that are not usually leveraged in a meaningful way, other than for them volunteering for the jobs that the organization has engaged them for in a volunteer capacity. Also use staff rotations and training, internships and mentoring as opportunities to upskill and bring people into different perspectives and allow people to have different experience. Simplify panel requirements. I've been on panel interviews where the requirements have been so onerous, you almost want to step back from the process. Try to really simplify that process. In order to make a process transparent and in order to make a process fair and equitable, it does not need screeds and screeds of paperwork that place undue burden on the panelists that they self-select out. So what you want to do is try to simplify your panel requirements and your panel processes to make this as simple as possible. And I've already talked about the use of digital platforms as a means to actually simplify some of these processes. And always get feedback. If you're going to improve, get feedback. Not only get feedback, but receive it and implement it where it's appropriate. Where you need to adjust, make those necessary adjustments. You only grow if you choose to grow and take on the feedback that others are giving you.
We certainly all do CV selection and interviews, but there's actually a range of other selection techniques out there that can be really useful. And I just want to talk through some of those. Aptitude assessments. Now, they can be great, but for some groups of people, such as some people with neurodiversity or a disability, or maybe English is their second language, having a timed test is not a true indicator of performance. And let's face it, in the real world, there are very few jobs that focus on speed over results. Work samples are really useful as a selection tool. So you're focusing on practical tests or work samples that can evaluate a candidate's ability to perform job-related tasks rather than subjective criteria. Because let's face it, interviews are a very artificial construct. Phone screening. Often a phone screen can be a really effective way to narrow your long list to your short list. Again, use a structured set of questions designed for information collection, and it really helps you to eliminate that bias that's often associated with how someone looks. Researchers have found time and time again, we've got a tendency to view attractive people as more intelligent, competent, even moral, and sociable than those that we view as unattractive. And as a consequence, they're much more likely to advance rapidly through their careers and earn higher wages. Group interviews. Look, there are some organisations that use group interviews for entry-level jobs, such as at McDonald's, for example. Ostensibly, they're looking to see, who is a good communicator or a good leader, that type of thing. It can be quite a subjective process. And finally, reference checks. Please treat it like an interview. Use that same selection criteria and use structured questions. So that way you're getting the same information about each candidate. Now, we've touched on different biases a few different times through this discussion so far, and we've just put a short list of some of the common ones up there for you. But what researchers have actually found is that there's more than 200 different types of biases out there. It is not possible for us to identify and then correct against more than 200 different types of bias. I mean, for the most part, we're not even aware that we are doing it. Leanin.org, which was an organization set up by Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook many years ago. She was the chief operating officer of Facebook. Leanin.org is based in the States, and they've done an enormous amount of work around women in the workforce, women in leadership in the States. But what they have found is equally applicable to other countries as well. And they've identified 6 key areas of bias against women in the workplace. And we've just popped them up there on the screen for you to have a bit of a look at. I'll just quickly run through them. Likability bias. It's really based on those age-old expectations where we expect men to act in a certain way, decisive, assertive, they're leaders. And we expect women to be kind and communal and supportive. And actually, when either gender goes against that stereotype, we like them less. But we do find that is more of an issue for women, particularly when they're in those leadership roles. Attribution bias. Sorry, we tend to see women as actually less competent than men, unless mistakes have been made, and then we're more likely to actually attribute those mistakes to women, and more likely to give credit for accomplishments to, if there's men in a team, they're more likely to get that accolade. Performance bias. Again, it's a deeply rooted assumption about our abilities. And what that tends to mean when it comes to recruitment and selection is that we tend to recruit or promote women on their past performance and recruit or promote men based on their future potential. And there can be an enormous difference between those two positions for two people who are performing equally well. Affinity bias. We like people who are like us. And so if you're in an organization where the majority of your senior leaders are male or white or both, then what we find happens is that the people that are then seen as proteges or mentored or something like that are more likely going to be people who look like or have the same background to those senior leaders. Maternal bias. Interestingly, as soon as a woman is married, she is seen as less committed to her career, whereas as soon as a man is married, he is seen as more committed to his career. And then finally, of course, we have intersectionality. Bias isn't just about gender. It's a whole range of different things. And you can be someone who, you might be female, you might have a disability, you might come from a religious minority, whatever it's going to be. And those different biases actually interact. And so 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, it can then sometimes equal 3. And that can be a real challenge for people. And of course, the barrier to all of this is our unconscious bias. And, we've talked in the past about unconscious bias, and I think everyone's sort of familiar with what that concept is. But even, in 2023, where we've got all of this legislation and we keep talking about it in public spaces, it's still a very live issue, and not just in Australia. So I just want to share with you a study that was actually published last year. So there was an extensive Australian-based research experiment published in 2023, and they were looking to find out if there was a glass ceiling for ethnic minorities in Australia. What they did was they submitted over 12,000 applications for more than 4,000 jobs. And those 12,000 applications, of course, were fake applications. So the researchers ensured that for every application, the candidate was born and raised in Australia with an Australian university education and had at least 7 years of Australian work experience. Plus, of course, meeting the requirements for the role. The only real difference in those submitted CVs was the name. So they picked names that were easily identifiable as English, Arabic, Greek, Chinese, Indian, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And the only difference was that for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander names, they also included a membership of an Aboriginal group in that CV, just to make it a bit more obvious. Now, the results were absolutely sobering. The applicants with non-English names applying for non-leadership roles had a 45% lower likelihood of receiving a positive response. 45%. The bias was even worse for leadership roles. If you had a non-English name, a 57% lower likelihood of receiving a positive response. No wonder we've got a talent shortage whenever we can't even get out of our own way based on someone's name. And it's not just the name. Research shows, and this has been, this study's been done in Germany, in the States, in Australia. They keep coming up with the same results. Research keeps showing that speakers with foreign accents are often perceived as less pleasant to listen to, less intelligent, less competent, of lower social status than people who speak the majority language. And of course, those negative assumptions impact your job suitability, the assessment of job relevant attributes and hiring recommendations and decisions, and of course, your likelihood for promotion. Now, there has been a model developed called the SEEDS model to try and take those 200 plus biases that we have and really coalesce those down or group those down into 5 key biases: similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety. So similarity, we favor things that are like us. And to try and find a way to combat that, a recommendation is to actually try and come up with a list of commonalities that you have with each potential candidate. There's always something that you have in common with someone else. You both might be in the same city. You both might have a dog. You both, just look to see what you can find to build that connection. Expedience. We like to make decisions fast, and even if that means that we don't have all of the data, we fill in the gaps and we make assumptions. So as Christine has already talked about, when you're making your recruitment decision, or your selection decision, I should say, don't just start talking about it, and because you'll end up going with the view of the most senior person in the room. Actually write down your scoring first. Actually commit it to paper before you share your thoughts with someone else. You're more likely to be able to justify why you've come up with a certain position rather than if you start talking about it first. Experience. Now, not surprisingly, we all think that our experience is the best source of information. If it's worked for us before, it will work for us again. Unfortunately, what that means is that we're less likely to consider someone's experience that could be different to ours. And that's really going to be an issue if it's, an overseas university education, or overseas experience, or lived experience, because we haven't had that ourselves. So if you're using a diverse interview panel, you're going to pick up these different perspectives, which is going to help you have more inclusive recruitment happening. And of course, if you're doing some sort of inclusive recruitment training beforehand, that's also going to help you to eliminate that bias, or at least be more aware of it. Distance. We really value things that are closest to us in time or space. If we look at, for example, how as a global society we've reacted to COVID versus climate change, it really shows that if it's something that's going to be affecting us now, we deal with it. If it's something that we think we can kick that can down the road, then we do that as well. So when it comes to something like interviews, if we've got one person who we're seeing face to face and someone else that we're seeing on a video call, we're actually going to build a stronger relationship with that person that we see face to face rather than the person who's on the video call. So if one has to be on a video, put all of them on a video, even if it's just for those first round interviews. And finally, safety. Now, what I mean by safety is that our brains are designed to keep us safe. So we tend to be quite risk averse. When it comes to things like a recruitment decision, well, if someone doesn't exactly fit the nice, neat little box that we're expecting, that might not be so safe. So if all of a sudden we're relying on someone's lived experience rather than a formal qualification, that's not the safe option. So try to approach decisions like you're being an advisor to the group. So try and take that emotion out of it. If someone came in from outside, what would their perspective be? So play devil's advocate. Okay, and Christine's now going to have a look at reasonable accommodations.
Reasonable accommodations. Now, we've spoken, for those of you who have attended our previous sessions, on what reasonable accommodations is. So, and we've also got a tip sheet on reasonable accommodations. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but you really need to make reasonable accommodations as part of your standard recruitment practice. Some simple examples of things you can do: provide interview questions in advance, untimed assessments, offer a range of ways to apply and adjust your assessment methodologies, and communicate where support is required, and actually ask the candidates what is it that they require in order for them to be involved in the interview process. Targeted position and recruitment. How do you use your targeted position and recruitment strategies effectively? Most commonly, this is used for identified positions for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, but how do you extend this beyond just our pool of Indigenous candidates? How do you apply the same concepts and the same principles to a broader talent base, so that you can get more diversity within your organizations? So with targeted recruitments, it's a special measure that's taken to address the disadvantage gap that is experienced by particular, not just racial group, well, in this instance, it's a racial group that's being used in the example, but it could be people with a disability, it could be women, it could be members of the LGBTIQ community, that you're looking to increase that cohort and that representation within your organization. It is about using genuine occupational requirements to refer to situations where being part of a particular race, part of a particular community, has led you to be excluded from that organization. But for particular positions, you being part of that particular race or that particular gender makes you actually more qualified than a candidate who isn't, who maybe has similar skill sets. So that's another way to use targeted recruitment in a positive way. So strategies to amplify your biases: build partnerships, have diverse representations in your proposals, develop transparent communications, particularly with your funders. We know that in the NGO sectors, there can be a challenge between what the funding body is asking and what you as an organization are trying to go, in the direction that you as an organization may be trying to go to. So make sure that you have transparent communications with your funders, have flexible recruitment strategies, and ensure that if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, these things align. these things align. And so that brings Lisa and I to the end to our presentation, and we'll move back to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa and Christine, for providing that really comprehensive overview of inclusive recruitment and selection. Now we would like to introduce you to our panel of guest speakers. So with us online today, we'd like to introduce our wonderful panelists. So we've got Fiona Austin-Weber. Fiona is the Member Relations Director at Diversity Council Australia, based in Melbourne. Fiona's key focus is the continuous improvement of the member value proposition. With professional experience spanning both not-for-profit and corporate sectors, Fiona brings expertise in learning and development, recruitment and consulting. Her extensive career path continues to be underpinned by her enduring commitment to workplace fairness and ensuring equitable access to meaningful employment for marginalised groups. Fiona is particularly passionate about championing and leveraging the strengths and skills of neurodivergent employees in the workplace. We've also got Gerard Atkinson joining us. So Gerard is a disability advocate and neurodiversity champion. As an autistic person, he brings lived experience to his work with governments and the not-for-profit sector. Through this work as a director at ARTD Consultants, Gerard has led the development of multiple disability and inclusion action plans for local councils and leads evaluations of programs and policies to understand what works and to help clients better serve their communities. Gerard advocates for greater understanding and engagement of neurodivergent people in the workplace and highlights the strengths that different ways of thinking and perceiving can bring to teams and organisations. Gerard's commitment to disability advocacy stems from his belief in building a more equitable and inclusive society where all people are given opportunity to meet their potential. We've also got Sean Payanta joining us. So whilst holidaying in Bali at the age of 19, Sean contracted a rare virus and lost 90% of his vision. Unable to continue his apprenticeship as a boilermaker, Sean was faced with the challenges of reassessing his work and life goals. As an avid snowboarder, before losing his sight, Sean quickly discovered the highs of para-alpine skiing and became a member of the Australian para-national team. Sean dedicated this chapter of his life to the sport, and as a result of his hard work, dedication and perseverance, represented Australia at the 2018 Winter Paralympics in South Korea. Post-Games, Sean speaks about living with disability and the barriers that are still at hand despite the advances in society and technology. Sean advocates for change, drives strategic community engagements, and educates society, making an everlasting difference within the Australian community. And finally, we've got Christine Castley joining us as well. Christine is the CEO of Multicultural Australia and is an experienced senior executive leader with substantial expertise in organisational transformation and change management, strategic governance, project management, policy, community engagement, operations and service delivery. Christine was previously Deputy Director General in the Department of the Premier and Cabinet and the Department of Housing and Public Works. Christine is a passionate advocate for equal access to justice and services for everyone, regardless of their gender, beliefs, or circumstances, and to doing everything possible to help the most disadvantaged people in our community, including refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, to live in safety and to go about their lives free from danger or harm. Christine has recently been appointed as a member of an expert panel by the Australian Government to undertake a major review into multiculturalism in Australia. So we're very excited to have these four wonderful panelists joining us today. And with those introductions, Sean, I might start with you. So Sean, the recruitment stage is generally a candidate's first experience of an organisation. So it's really important for this stage to be done in a really inclusive way. How can organisations make their recruitment processes more inclusive and encourage diverse candidates to apply?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much, Nina, for the invitation to come along and be a part of this webinar. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed listening to Christine and Lisa's presentation earlier. I took a lot of information away from that. I think the first step into be able to create that more inclusive recruitment strategy process and be able to encourage people from diverse backgrounds to apply, I think organisations really need to be aware of people who live with disability, injuries or health conditions, people from diverse backgrounds and what their specific needs are. It's important to remember that people who do come from from diverse backgrounds and may have barriers to employment, their barriers might not be immediately apparent. I know if we focus on disability and look at some of the look at some of the statistics, if 1 in 5 Australians who live with a disability and 90% of disability is invisible, we never really know what barriers people are trying to overcome. So it's really important for leaders and for hiring managers to be able to create that welcoming environment throughout the recruitment process that encourages people to be able to feel comfortable and speak up about the different supports that they may need, that which will allow them to be able to put their best foot forward. It's important throughout the recruitment process to be able to create accessible position descriptions that give people equal access to be able to apply for different vacancies, whether that's applying for someone with a vision impairment like myself, who might need to be able to access screen readers, or potentially someone who might need to be able to read the position description in a different language. By providing that adjustment, it gives everyone a fair opportunity. And if you're preparing to interview a person from a diverse background or welcome them into your workplace, it's really important to spend some time and do some research and find out how you can best support this individual. Find out some of the small things that you could put in place to make that person feel more at ease. And I also just want to touch a bit on disclosure and the power of encouraging people to disclose information about their barriers. Why there is no legal obligation, for example, for a person with a disability to disclose information about their barrier, I know I strongly encourage people to, because quite simply, without people sharing information, there's no way they can get support throughout the recruitment process. But I know from my personal experience and speaking to other people from different backgrounds, people with disabilities, there is a big fear about sharing information because I feel like they're instantly going to be discriminated and disregarded from the recruitment process. And I think a lot of people don't know when to share information, whether or how to disclose in a cover letter that they have a disability without the fear of discrimination. So again, I think this falls back onto the organisation and leaders within the organisation to truly be able to highlight your interest that you want to be a diverse and inclusive employer. And I think a great way to do that is by including diversity statements within the job ad that encourages people from all backgrounds, whether that be cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people Indigenous backgrounds, or Torres Strait Islanders, or people who do live with disability. And that diversity statement can encourage people to apply and that they're welcome within that organisation. And even during the interview, or even before the interview, you can have a conversation with the person, ask if there's any adjustments that they might benefit from throughout the interview process. Some of these adjustments could be as simple as doing a one-on-one interview rather than a group interview, that like previously mentioned, virtual interviews, or even in a more comfortable environment where the person's not stressed out by going to a corporate office or something like that, just to allow the person the opportunity to be able to put their best foot forward. And also, I just want to touch, be adjustable, have a real open mind about how things can be done. Just because something's been done this certain way for the last 10 years, 15 years, it doesn't mean it has to continue to go down that way. And I just want to leave with my top tips for creating that inclusive recruitment process. And that's that if you really want to be an inclusive employer, you really need to promote it. And promote it on your socials, promote it on your websites. Again, a great place is that diversity statement. But before anyone applies for a job, they're going to go do some research. They're going to look at your socials. They're going to look at your website. And if they can't see themselves reflected there, then they're not going to feel comfortable to apply. Again, be adjustable. I know people with disabilities, they spend their whole lives trying to find creative ways, trying to overcome challenges, and they can bring these skills to the workplace. So if you can be adjustable about how a job can be done, you're really going to benefit from having access to a broader talent pool. And don't change your people to fit your roles. If you have a candidate and they're really great, they've got a particular set of skills, see how you can adjust your roles to be able to suit the people that you have applying. You know, if they can utilize more of their strengths to do different parts of their jobs, allow them to have that flexibility. But also really important to know that there's organisations out there like the company that I work for who can help you with your diversity and inclusion workforce planning. They can help you to access a broader talent pool of people. And I think, you know, the best advice that I can give you guys, and I know Lisa touched about it earlier, it's just be human. Give a person the opportunity to be able to have a conversation with someone. I know when going through an online application process or having to disclose information about your barrier or your unique needs, it sometimes can be very hard to do when they might be trying to talk to a robot when submitting a job application. So if a person can actually have a conversation with a human and talk to them about the barriers they're trying to overcome and explain, because what you read on paper might come across a lot more significant if someone can explain to you the support that they need. So just have that human element, and it will help to create a lot more inclusive recruitment process, and will attract a more diverse, broad range of applicants to your organisation.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really, really like those practical tips you provided. And I think, there are some really simple, practical ways organisations can make their process more inclusive by including that diversity statement, as you mentioned, and, having a statement around if you require any accommodations in this recruitment process, please let us know. So there's some really practical tips you've given there. So thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, making it inclusive and giving people a fair opportunity, it really is just doing the simple things to make it easier for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sean. So Christine, I'll move over to you now. So recruitment and employment processes in Australia are very different from other countries, and this can be quite challenging, especially for candidates from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. How can organisations build cultural capability into their recruitment process?
Thanks very much, Sarah, and hello, everyone. That's a great question. And I think before I kind of get a bit into the how, I actually do want to talk about the why and the what, because, I think Christine and Lisa are giving you some really good tips, practical tips around how you build cultural capability into your process. But unless you truly actually are engaged with and believe in why you should do it, other than just generally understanding that it's a good thing to do, that you actually have to think and understand for yourself why it's a good thing to do, because you want to reflect the population base, because you genuinely believe that it will make your workplace better, and you genuinely believe that it will actually help you to serve whoever your customer or client base is better. If you've actually thought through for your business why you think it is a good thing and understand that and then communicate that within your workplace, I think you'll go a long way to actually lifting the cultural capability of your workplace. And there's that really important point about it not being stuck in a corner of your organization as well, that you allocate that role to the HR person or the diversity and inclusion person, that is actually owned and shared as an outcome that you want for your workplace by the whole workplace, and you're regularly having conversations about why it's good for your workplace to actually lift your cultural capability. And part of that why is also understanding who we are as a community. And that's also an important part of actually being able to very genuinely lift your cultural capability. So when you understand who we are as a country, who we are as a state, who we are as a community, who we are as workplaces. And if I just share with you, the data around, so who we are as Australia, nearly 50% of Australians now are migrants or children of migrants. Nearly 40% of people speak a language other than English at home. In Queensland, 1 in 5 Queenslanders were born overseas, and almost 1 in 10 Queenslanders speak a language other than English at home. And that's not even the people who do speak English at home who speak multilingual languages. And so the what around that is just to really then think about who we are as a country. What do you think about who we are as a country? What do you think we are as a community? And we need to shift our thinking in terms of understanding that we are not necessarily a monolingual, monocultural community, country, workplace. We are very multilingual and multicultural in terms of numbers. And we need to actually fully understand that in terms of shaping our identity of who we are. And that also then adds on to us actually then genuinely and authentically saying, this is why we need to lift our cultural capability and understand who we are. I just want to make that point because I think it's a really, really important part about, you can have all the practical tips and tricks, which are really important, but you've got to kind of think back to for yourself as individuals, for yourself as a workplace, for yourself as teams, for ourselves as a community. Why are we actually investing time and effort into this? Who needs to be engaged and who do we want to engage with? And that comes down then to the how. So you've heard quite a bit, I think, in terms of the processes and how you can improve those. And I think in terms of processes, it's very much about understanding that your recruitment selection process is a culture in itself, as particularly and within particular sectors. And if I kind of reflect back on my public service career, people seeking to enter government, working the public service process, generally are about trying to work out how you navigate that particular culture of how you write the application, how do you actually engage in the interview process, and how you understand what they're looking for in terms of how they bring people into their culture. And that applies, there's a different culture then in, say, a different sector. So for the mining sector, it's really quite different in terms of that culture. In the community services sector, it's kind of similar to government, but also a bit different in terms of a particular culture, a mind frame, a mindset, a way of doing and speaking and thinking that people are looking for that's kind of part of the culture of that sector. So if you understand how we have these different cultures already, and then you overlay that with the different nationality, cultural, ethnic, language cultures that people bring in all of their diversity into that diversity of cultural workplaces, if we acknowledge that this isn't about bringing a particular cohort of people who are uniquely different from the vast majority of us, it actually is about just a different way about being very agile and responsive and lifting our capability in a number of different ways, then you also then understand that this is a piece that is very much worth investing in and one that we will reap benefits from. And within that, then you do have to think about your biases. And I think that the stuff that Lisa covered off in terms of biases are really, really important. You spoke in terms of women, but those biases do apply in relation to anyone really who kind of is not like us. Affinity bias is probably one of the most powerful things that operate in the workplace and actually act to exclude, even with the best intentions in the world. What I really like to often share with people is to actually acknowledge that all of us have biases. All of us gravitate to people that we feel an affinity with, people who kind of actually then support our confirmation bias, who confirm that our view of the world is correct, who actually we understand better because they're more like us. We all work in that way. That is our default mindset. That is what we need to kind of be able to kind of make our judgments and assessments. And that kind of then raises that question in terms of process is about how do you get the balance right between merit, because there's certainly a place for merit in terms of ensuring fair outcomes, but getting that balance right between merit and inclusion, because merit often, with its kind of claims to being objective, in setting those objective criteria, you often then, in setting that objective criteria, then exclude people. So then how do you find a way to get that balance right, or to get past, some inherent systemic biases that are so embedded that you don't even realize you're including them, because it's the way things have always been done, because it's the way that we've established ourselves as a workplace that delivers a particular standard of skills, quality, service, which that's just what we need. The classic example I'll share with you in terms of how people often think, the thing I hear most often in terms of barriers that employers see is they talk about language skills. And the question I will often ask them is, are you talking about the person's ability to speak English, or are you talking about the fact that you struggle to understand their accent? Because do you read accent as equaling lack of English capability? Because very often we find that people's written English is way better than the written English of, say, all of those people who surround them with and are speaking with an Australian or an English accent. But you don't actually call that out. You just say kind of they come from a non-English speaking country, therefore their language skills are less than this. There's also a cultural bias within Australia in the workplace where really, from my perspective, quite oddly, I think, we view qualifications, skills, and experience that has been earned overseas as being lesser than qualifications, skills, and experience that's been earned in Australia. And that mindset, I think, that we weave into our processes actually really kind of then serves to exclude people in the name of merit. And certainly what we found in the work that we have done is that in terms of trying to place, we run a whole series at Multicultural Australia of employment programs, that we find often the biggest barrier is people saying that an employer saying, oh, look, it'd be much better if they had a referee who was Australian, or if they had skills that were much more, yeah, sure, they're being recognised, but I really don't understand what was in the course content that would have happened in, well, look, if it was a university in Brazil, is it really going to be as good as a university in Australia? And what we're doing in terms of that, with that mindset, is that we are actually excluding ourselves as a country from the ability to tap into knowledge, wisdom, experience, ways of doing things that really expands the base that already exists in Australia. We're cutting ourselves off from innovation. So this is the piece then that we want to think about, you know, that mindset that we bring to these things, where we're saying we want to be safe and make sure that we employ people who only have educational qualifications and a background and a lived experience that is similar to ours. We're actually not tapping into, one, the volume of people that are available to us in terms of addressing current skills and labour shortages, but also a whole potential in terms of how we lift ourselves as a country. And that then lifts as well into our identity as a country, and how our workforce can actually be the platform for Australia to really lift its economic capability as a multilingual, multicultural, multinational country that is actually able to play on that world stage, because the people who actually do the work in our country are actually on an even platform with where everything else is happening internationally. So we improve ourselves locally, but we improve ourselves nationally. And that is really the economic argument for why that brings together kind of the economic and the social arguments for why we actually should lift our cultural capability and how we can lift our cultural capability. So some of the things that, you know, I'll suggest to you in terms of just practical tips to finish off is really about things around having that awareness and understanding of cultural differences, but in a way that still retains the human essence of the individuals we're dealing with. We are all of us human beings. If you see yourself as having a culture that is alien to the person you're speaking to, as much as the person who's thinks you're speaking to has a culture that's alien to you, you're both equally coming from a perspective of alien cultures, then you're at a much more equal platform. It shifts the whole conversation and the whole mindset. Think about the ways that you can both communicate to then connect. Connection and experience in the workplace are really, really important, I think, precursors to then getting into those processes. So if I can share with you the example of, we have a program called Work and Welcome, where we do is workplaces fundraise amongst their staff to actually pay for a person to get 6 to 12 weeks work experience in their workplace. We've had then 86% success rate of that person then going on to other jobs successfully, because they have an Australian referee, they have experience in Australian workplace that demonstrates that credibility. We have a cultural mentoring program which gets a person into role. It's about connections, networks, understanding the experience of being in an Australian workplace that actually positions that person really well to understand what's happening when they enter that formal selection process that we need to do to ensure it is a merit-based process. So you give that person the precursor, the work experience, and you give themselves the familiarity that everybody else who has kind of grown up in this space will have. That a person who is a new migrant to this country, for example, or a person who's been out of the workforce for a really long time, because we do also a lot of work with parents of young children who are re-entering the workforce. You give them that sense of what does the workplace look like today, or what does the workplace look like in Australia, so that they can use that to inform how they then present themselves in the best light in the selection process. But really, a workplace that's really going to be successful around recruiting for diversity is one that really is thinking about innovation. It's thinking about being creative. It's thinking about how you actually can be productive from a global lens, because that's really kind of setting the bar a bit higher from where we usually kind of would look at it in terms of things always being the way that they should be. And finally, I'll just share with you an example about being very literate, particularly when you're dealing with migrants, around what are the immigration work requirements. And an example of recently when I was speaking to a local government who said they were really trying to recruit for diversity, but no one was applying for their jobs. And when they asked us to have a look at their position descriptions, they talked about a work requirement being an Australian citizen. And we said, well, what about permanent residents? Why would you not say people with work rights in Australia? And they kind of went, yeah, we can do that. And that immediately shifted things. Now, they had simply thought that they were just, that the only people with work rights were people who were citizens, not kind of bothering to expand it, was hampering their abilities. Now, that's a really key mechanical, very minor thing that impacted who was applying for their jobs. They weren't looking to exclude deliberately, but it was the choice of language. That was just a tiny little line at the bottom of their PDs that was actually excluding people from various diverse backgrounds from being able to apply to work with them. And finally, cultural capability is something that doesn't just happen. So while I've talked to you about how you practice, how you get experience, how you form connections in very real ways, you actually do need to invest as a whole organization in deliberately kind of building and lifting your capability. We spend a lot of time delivering cultural capability training in workplaces, and it really does kind of go into those issues about understanding your bias, understanding the different ways that you can work as a business in your own right. And it does make a difference when you actually see this as something that you actually spend time and effort on doing. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to get it to work. It's not going to happen as a peripheral or just a by the way type piece. You actually have to very deliberately think about how you can become a truly culturally capable workplace and employer.
Thank you so much for that, Christine. I really like those examples you provided and how you unpacked that concept of bias a bit more. And I think your comment around reflecting on the why is really important for organizations. So really considering, why are we putting the time and effort into making our workplace more diverse and inclusive? I think that's a really key initial step. So thank you so much. So Gerard, I'm going to move on to you next. So Gerard, ARTD, the organisation you work for, have recently transformed their recruitment processes to be more inclusive and to build a more diverse workforce. Could you describe ARTD's journey with this and the lessons learned through this experience?
Absolutely. So for those out there, my name's Jared Atkinson. I'm a director with ARTD Consultants. I'm a middle-aged fellow, brown, close-cropped hair, in a blue suit, blue shirt, and orange tie. And in the background is my office with a whiteboard, some framed certificates, and an inhumane amount of coffee-making equipment. I'm going to tell you a little quick story about ARTD Consultants, our company. We've been around for about 35 years. We do evaluation, and we want to understand what works for whom in what circumstances in communities. And while diversity and serving the needs of underserved and disadvantaged communities has always been part of our work, it was a few years ago, as the company was going through a big transformation and a lot of growth, that we realized that who we were as a company didn't really reflect the communities that we were engaging with and that we were serving. And that was a problem on two fronts for us. On one hand, we knew that we weren't reflecting our values as an organization within the community, but also because we weren't reflecting our values, we knew that that was going to hurt us competitively when people wanted to hire us, because they couldn't see themselves in our organization. And why would you want consulting from the same old group of stale male white people? It didn't reflect what we wanted to be as an organization. So we really went back to our recruiting processes and basically tore them down, really critically analyzed them the same way that we'd critically analyze a policy or a program to understand how it's working, what we're trying to achieve with it, and how we're knowing if it's working. And that's where we started rebuilding things. We looked at the ways that people could apply, the way that we were advertising, and how we did our whole process of interviewing through to onboarding, through to career development, and identified places where we realized that we could be doing better. Now, one of these things I like to joke that evaluation has terrible marketing as a profession. Most people don't know what an evaluator is. I just sort of describe it as, a government or an organization spends a bunch of money trying to solve a problem. When some bright spark asks, did it work? My job is to go in and figure that out. But in terms of the key skill that we use, it's critical thinking, which means that we draw upon people from all sorts of different disciplines and backgrounds. I joke that we give philosophy graduates a career path, because we have quite a few in there. But what we needed to understand was how can we do that better with people? And we changed our interview process to make it more task focused, to recognize that you didn't necessarily have to have a particular degree in something or even direct experience in evaluation. We wanted to look at evaluation and evaluative thinking in order to understand whether that person was going to be able to deliver the kind of work that we wanted to deliver to our clients. Other things that we did, and this was where I was able to bring my experience as an autistic person, was we started sending out the interview questions ahead of the interviews. And I know some companies that react with shock horror when we say this. And I say, well, no, we get better answers, for one. But two, it's good for probity. Everybody knows that they're being asked the same set of questions in that interview. It's a more transparent, it's a clearer process. And it's also allowed us to get feedback from people about our questions and whether it's, you know, the right set of questions to be answering. And that's where I bring it round to one of those areas that is a bit of a hard cause for me. I talk about the myth of cultural fit within an organization. Culture is not something you can control. It's something that evolves. It's co-created by everybody within that organization as well as the stakeholders outside it. And we realized that we shouldn't be looking for that in our interviews. But what we then realized is that we have a great set of guiding values as a company that we can use as part of our interviewing process. And we rebuilt all our interview questions around our values of commitment, critical thinking, creativity, curiosity, collaboration, and compassion. Now, those 6 values, simple values, but different people interpret them differently. And so our interview questions became about surfacing how that person interprets that value and puts it into practice in their daily life. Now, that may be very different to the way that we might do it on the interview panel, but we recognize that even different people in our company live those values differently. And by understanding how a candidate is living that value in their work, we better understood their thought processes, their way of thinking, and their capability to do the kinds of work that we offer. I will say it's still an evolving journey. Whilst we've made some really strong strides in improving the diversity of our workforce across a range of different groups and communities, we know we still have a long way to go, and we're constantly refining our process based on feedback internally as well as from candidates. So I will say this to you as a takeaway, you know, it is something that you have to work at continually. It can't be a one and done thing to change your processes, but we are a stronger organization because of it. And I think we're doing some of the best work we ever had. So thank you for having me, and I'll pass it over to Sarah to introduce Fiona.
Thank you so much, Gerard. That was really good. It's so nice to hear that case study of the journey your organisation has been on. And I really like that point you made around that skills-based hiring. So, you know, looking at the skills and also that values alignment rather than looking at traditional qualifications and traditional experience. I think, you know, it opens the door to so many different groups as well. Thank you so much. So Fiona, moving on to you now. So there's quite a lot of interest at the moment in the artificial intelligence or AI space, even in the recruitment area. And when IA recruitment tools are designed and deployed with diversity front of mind, they can increase accessibility, fairness, objectivity, and transparency. But of course, without a diversity focus, AI recruitment tools can also bake in bias and hinder efforts to increasing workforce diversity. So my question to you is, how can community organisations use AI in the recruitment process so that it works for diversity and inclusion?
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that question, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm dialing in from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to all First Nations people, their leaders past and present. I'm a white woman with long hair, mid-brown colour, wearing a black top, of course, because I'm coming from Melbourne, and my background is very blurred. So I'm here to talk about using AI inclusively. I've noticed the time, we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll try and be brief. So DCA is focusing very heavily on this at the moment. Our members are very interested. They're getting bombarded by AI companies wanting to sell their recruitment tools, and they're very confused about how to choose a tool, how to employ a tool, and especially how to maintain, that diversity and inclusion focus, so that they're ensuring, I guess, that whatever has gone into the design of the AI tool is not negatively impacting their diversity objectives. So why is AI in recruitment particularly challenging? Well, one reason would be that we have this digital divide. Today, it's really crucial for job seekers to have access to technology, and especially when applying to organisations who are using AI. But we know that not everyone has equal access. The Australian Digital Inclusion Index highlights that the groups most affected by digital exclusion are older workers, First Nations people, and those with lower socioeconomic status. And these groups also face higher rates of unemployment, underemployment, and discouragement in the job market. So without deliberate action to make AI recruitment tools more inclusive, these folks are going to be even further disadvantaged. There's lack of governance in AI at the moment. We're really playing catch up. Governance is really at the early stages. So there's challenges in terms of compliance, legal requirements, privacy considerations, which adds further complexity to decision making for organisations with AI. We know that till now, especially, AI recruitment tools haven't been designed with a focus on diversity. And when they are, they can do all those things we want them to. However, to date, the organisations developing AI have not been centering the voices of lived experience in the design of the AI recruitment tools, and therefore they can be mirroring society's inequities and biases and just perpetuating those further. Organisational readiness is another one. So this session is about inclusive recruitment. Inclusive recruitment is a really important factor to have, to be practicing before you can then employ AI inclusively, because you need to be able to recognise and have stewardship over the AI, assess how well it's doing, whether it is actually impacting negatively in terms of bias, and who's getting through your recruitment processes. So without this foundation, it's harder to ensure that your use of AI is inclusive. There's a bit of a perception that AI is going to solve the issues of exclusion because it's not a sentient being with human biases. But as I mentioned, the bias can already be in the design of the AI, embedded for various reasons. It could be the data set or just the design of how people access it. So recruitment teams really need to understand things like bias and the negative impact, to be aware of how they can mitigate it, or also assess the tools that they want to use for their D&I credentials. So the types of AI tools currently being used by organisations that we know of: ChatGPT to refine job descriptions. There's also specific tools that can de-bias job ads. We know of gender decoders that are rated very highly in terms of improving the number of women who apply for jobs and other underrepresented groups. Sourcing tools like LinkedIn and Seek to reach a broader pool of candidates. Screening and assessment tools such as video interviewing and chatbots. Background checking tools, interview scheduling tools, even onboarding can be done by AI. Some are higher risk, such as the screening tools. Some are lower risk, such as interview scheduling. So perhaps if you're wanting to dip your toe into the water, consider low-risk type tools like interview scheduling to start with. It's important to have the right tool for the right purpose. We've done a lot of research in the space now. We're at stage 3 of a 3-stage AI inclusively in recruitment, specifically research piece. So one of the main findings is that it's really important to have the right tool for the right purpose and use it for the right reasons. There is no one size fitting all. And just like with traditional recruitment, your specific diversity objectives should be defined based on who you're looking to recruit. Some diversity dimensions are better served by AI than others, for example. One example I can give you is that video interviews seem to be increasing the number of female participation in terms of who gets through, but might not necessarily be the best choice for other groups, such as neurodivergent candidates. If a high volume of applications is expected, you might want to think about screening tools as your first go-to. For hard to fill roles, it's about sourcing. LinkedIn, Seek, they have great tools in that sense. And you can also look at your candidate parameters. The flip side, of course, being that using the wrong tools can have an adverse effect on diversity objectives. Examples being Amazon selection criteria based on historical data, so it favoured men over women. And another really interesting one from our research team was that job seekers with shelves behind them during video interviews were less likely to get through, which highlights that environmental factors can have an impact. I would have thought shelves and books would have been more of a reason, more sort of enticing, but apparently not. Also, something our team found out was that advertising to women through LinkedIn could be more expensive per click, which might make the AI tool use different methodologies. So human checks and balances are really important. I realise I've run over time, so I'll just check in whether it's okay to keep going.
Yeah, happy for you to keep going for a bit, Fiona.
Okay, no worries. I won't be too much longer. So human checks and balances are still really important, as is evaluating the tool. So you put it into practice, but make sure that you are continuously reviewing and evaluating the AI tool to make sure there's no drift in performance of the tool over time, checking whether there's an over-representation or an under-representation of a particular group amongst who's getting through, which might indicate potential bias in the selection process. Who's being left out in terms of age, gender, location, at what stage are candidates dropping out? Are they simply choosing not to engage if they know that you're using AI, which can definitely happen with some groups? Think about consulting job applicants, the human end users of the tool, to identify any barriers that they may be encountering. Some questions you can ask companies who are offering tools would be whether they have their own D&I strategy in their own workforce, about the data sets that they're using to establish the tool. Are they Australian? How large are they? Are they diverse enough to reflect the real world? What steps have they taken to reduce bias in building and testing the tool? More and more organisations are becoming aware that that's important in the tools they produce. How has their tool been used in other organisations, and do they have reference customers? What have the outcomes been? What training's offered? What ongoing support? Are they regularly reviewing the tool? And accessibility, such as, is it available on multiple devices? Can it be accessed from a computer, public computer in a library, for example, from a mobile phone? Are there potential limitations for some candidates, such as, those with vision impairment? Is it screen reader compatible? Lots of things to do due diligence about what you select. So just to quickly recap, AI in recruitment is here to stay. It's being used quite widely. particularly for large recruitment exercises. But having those inclusive recruitment basics in place are really important to make sure that whatever AI you use is going to be as inclusive as possible. Use specific tools for specific problems that align with your specific objectives. Make sure you have human checks and balances to check that you don't have biases skewing your results and your, I guess, the opportunities you're giving people, and don't rely solely on AI-generated outcomes. Maybe AI isn't the best thing to use for a specific exercise. You can mix things up. Give people options, as Sean mentioned, in terms of how to access your recruitment. AI might not be the sole method. Use it alongside other methods. As I mentioned, some people aren't keen to engage with AI, so you might want to offer a range of options. Diversity Council Australia has a lot of resources if you're interested in finding out more. AI is here to stay. It's just really about using it consciously with that D&I lens, being educated, doing your due diligence, and using the right tool for the right diversity objective. So I'll stop there, 5 minutes over.
Oh, that's okay. That was really interesting, Fiona. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely link in the post-event email to DCA's resources around AI because, as you mentioned, it's an evolving space. It's here to stay. And I think it's really good for organisations to see, where it might fit into their recruitment process. So thank you for that. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. And a big thank you to Lisa and Christine and our wonderful panelists who contributed to the discussion today. You'll all receive a pop-up on your screen with an evaluation poll. So it would be much appreciated if you could complete that poll so we can find out how you found the session. So our next session is on Thursday, the 30th of May. That is on creating a healthy, confident and stable team through leadership. So we'll be delving more into the practical ways managers can support their teams, particularly employees who may have diverse needs. So we hope to see you along for that session. And just a reminder to keep an eye out for the post-event email, which you'll receive in the next few days. So that will include the slides from today's session, as well as some resources aligned with the session topic as well. So I hope you all enjoyed the session today. And again, thank you very much to Lisa, Christine for the content, and also to our panelists, Sean, Christine, Fiona, and Jared for sharing your valuable insights on the topic. So thanks everyone and have a wonderful rest of the day.